So this is a talk about Ofcom and Beyond by Murray Niman, G6JYB. So Murray is going to talk to us about the Ofcom consultation, as well as looking ahead to other changes in prospect across HF and microwaves from IARU and from the ITU WRC conference this autumn. He will outline the RSGB's response to the consultation and take questions about the next steps. To give you more opportunity for questions and answers, these updates are being held as a forum outside the shorter programme, right, as we know that. Sorry. So Murray is the chair of the RSGB Spectrum Forum, which leads on licensing with Ofcom as well as IARU and band planning. He is no stranger to the area, having previously held the post of microwave manager, and was also busy with activities at his local club. Murray is also a member of the Exam Standards Committee. We are really lucky to have Murray doing this job, so welcome, Murray.
Thank you, Stuart. So is that, I think that's providing audio. So yes, I've worn a few hats, and that does suggest I've ended up with a few short straws in my time, and there's never a dull moment. So to coin a phrase, it's the beyond is not quite to infinity and beyond, which was obviously the clickbait in the title, but Ofcom has finished, but only the consultation. There's a lot of steps to come. And before we get to the World Radio Conference, which Barry at length mentioned 23 cents, but we'll cover some other issues, we travel, unfortunately, via Serbia for the Region 1 conference. And so this talk is in essentially thirds, and whether you want to ask questions on the Ofcom bit, midway, or wait till the end when you hear the rest of the picture is entirely up to you. So, before I get into this illustrates not only the elements, but in reverse order. As if you're in Barry's talk earlier, it's the ITU, the International Telecoms Union, that sets our frequency allocations, your frequency schedule in your license. Classically, they don't get too involved in the minor detail below that, apart from, unfortunately, one of our current problems. So without frequencies, there's no amateur radio, so you either go and get them from an ITU walk, or you make sure you try not to lose them, which is nowadays our priority in these situations. That then gets sort of coordinated or band planned typically at IARU level. Coming down to national level, you have the terms and conditions that Ofcom set, and of course we also get some of those band plans tailored at national level in the UK. So we've ended up in the most unusual year where all three elements are changing with very little certain at this point, but an awful lot's going to happen over the coming weeks and few months. We obviously had, date-wise, we couldn't have chosen it better. The Ofcom consultation launched when all of our RSGB senior staff were away in Friedrichshafen in June. Although we had, obviously, a bit of a hint as to it coming down the line, their launch timing was fantastically helpful. That finished in September. We'll obviously cover that in a bit more in a moment. If you're expecting me to give you all the results, I can't prejudge Ofcom, I'm not Ofcom, but you will get a few insights. The outcomes from this are due around Christmas in the first step at any rate. But first, in only a couple of weeks' time, is the Region 1 conference. That obviously does take into account all sorts of stuff, and we'll explain the various topic areas that's looking at. And it's not just operational stuff, there's shaping the future and strategic stuff in there. And then we're only back about 10 days or so, and we have then the World Radio Conference, which runs for a complete month in Dubai, which is, of course, might be warm for that time of year, but it is not the cheapest place to stay. And we've had to plan very carefully on the budget for both this one and this one falling into the same financial year, which is unprecedented pretty well. Clearly, we will want to have a Christmas break, so unlike the normal RSGB cycle, where there's usually an annual Spectrum Forum meeting and reports in November, December, so that REDCOM gets the band plan tweaks for the following year, that's not going to happen. We will have to digest all of this and review it early after Christmas, and it's not the only thing that causes a timing issue. So, on that note, we'll get into Ofcom. So, if you were to read the Ofcom consultation, there are 100,000 licences in issue, which is quite a good number. But of course, people hold multiple ones, and there's some club licences in that list. But when you strip the duplicates out, it's still quite a good number. It says, in fact, depending on where you read, between 68 and 76,000, but in the consultation they refer to 71,000. Still quite a good number in terms of per head of population by European standards, actually. Whether or not all 70,000 are alive and active is a very interesting question. But we do know 20,000 of them are, because they're RSGB members. And you kind of, so let's assume, and there are silent keys declared to Ofcom. So each year we see roughly 1,000 silent keys, mainly in the full licenses, being cancelled out by families declaring. So let's say there may be 60,000 sort of still alive, but they may not all be active. In fact, in a typical year, we get more new full licensees from people reactivating their license than we do from the exam system. In fact, we don't need the exam system, we just need to keep recycling old folk, controversially. But in the end, the number who actually got round to writing out the Ofcom reply form and submitting it was around 1,400. So on the one hand, you could say 1,400 versus 70,000 is a very modest percentage. On the other hand, that's one of the highest response rates that Ofcom has had in years. In fact, the last highest one was also an old amateur consultation. So it's given their assessment staff and their webmaster a real headache, because normally they promise to publish the responses, not their conclusions, relatively quickly. But between us driving the publicity to get people to reply, and the fact that they made their form more complex than they should have done you could have privacy on every individual question rather than just your name or all or nothing. That's made it quite awkward for them to fulfill their obligation to be transparent and publish. We expect, you can either have lots of abstract, PDFs with bits knocked out, or what we may see is one massive spreadsheet, which is because the reason there was a very strong preference to use their form was to automate the processing, because they don't have the staff and are trying to use a bit of AI to sift and collate it. So from our point of view, if you're one of the 1,400, thank you very much. If you weren't, well, you've missed your chance for the most part. So hands up who replied. That's a good percentage in the room. Hands up if you didn't, and was that because you didn't have time, assumed we would do it, or something else?
Well, I discussed in our local club members, someone put a thing in, but I forgot to put my own.
Oh, right, so was there a club response itself or individual members?
I think it was individual, but
Yeah. So that's not, if I had that percentage across all 70,000, we'd have done really well. But actually, 1,400 was very, very close to my 1,500 forecast, because there was a bit of a discussion on logistics as they opened it, saying, how are you going to cope? And the Ofcom were very, very keen to understand how we were going to communicate to the amateurs, and are we going to offer a template with pre-prepared answers? And we knew that was not the way to do it. In fact, as we said in one of the early videos, anything like copycat answers would be dropped. They have no value. So the fact that we've driven that number of individual responses, there'll be a few club and other organisational ones, you know, but the fact that those are genuinely independent replies actually works better. Now, the fact that whether or not Ofcom agree or disagree with every individual point, because you could say some of these consultations just rubber stamp what they're proposing in the first place is another matter. But nonetheless, some of them were okay, some of them were quite detailed. Don?
You up on one thing, Murray. You said that was the highest response Ofcom has had.
In a long while, apart from...
As an absolute number or as a percentage of the potential stakeholders who could reply?
It's not as an absolute number, because if you go back to the lifetime licence, which had the Grim Reaper of Death, sort of rather negative RSGB PR around it in the 2005-2006 consultation, that was higher, actually. Not much higher, but it was higher. But in terms of considered individual responses, certainly in spectrum consultations, which this came under, this is a high one, without a doubt. You know, compared to some of their Ofcom, you know, media complaints type stuff, where they get thousands of people complaining about some TV personality, you know, that's neither here nor there. I'm not counting that one. The other thing, of course, is it wasn't just your license. Remember, this wasn't just your license conditions. This was also the rest of the framework, and it's that part which hadn't really been consulted on before, and is where a lot of the policy reset and greyness has been. Right. Okay. Anyway, so that's that bit. So, what's the timing and next steps now? So. The first bit of timing, which I haven't put up there, but I did mention, is before the consultation finished, Ofcom's expert on this, who wrote the consultation, had already retired. So we have met the very nice new folk who've come in, who are not totally new to amateur radio. One of them worked in the Spectrum licensing group, who are based in Warrington.
Can I just ask a question, because it's relevant to your presentation? What political brief do they have?
None. Ofcom are fiercely independent of government and politics.
But that's theory.
No. They don't like being pressured by politicians, I can assure you. In the past, in fact, just deviating, there have been occasions where individual amateurs have gone off to their MP to lobby for some NOV or issue, whether it's a EMC noise or where's my repeater license or some other things. And I can assure you that's the guarantee to wind them up. They are, of all the regulatory agencies, they're probably the most independent because they are only responsible to Parliament. They are not directly governed by any government department. They have a sponsored department which has moved around over time. It's currently the new Department for Science and Innovation. It used to be DCMS. But they're given lots of duties by Parliament, but in terms of governance and policy, there's a framework in the Communications Act, which is their governing principles, but I won't say they make it up as they go along. But here they have gone to a lot of effort to understand what amateurs do and nowadays want to do. And if you looked at that consultation, you could see they'd obviously had some background. It was far better written than the 2015 one, where effectively they had to backtrack on some of the call sign policy, for example. And who was here at the RSGB convention years ago when the Ofcom rep stood up and tried to present that? Yes. So I'm glad. So there were a few, which was the first attempt at the RSLs thing, which did not go down too well. They learnt from that lesson. They retreated a little bit on the day, but that they were determined to come back on it, as you probably realised. Yes.
We absolutely need to point out that it was not us that instituted that.
Yes, it wasn't our idea, but anyway. So they are working very hard to read very carefully all the 1400 plus the 1401, which was theirs in the first place, and say, does it fit or not? Tick. We certainly, obviously, had the odd conversation, but they approach it from a very legal prejudice point of view. So anything, we might have the odd coffee with them is confidential, but we can tell where they're sort of focusing. And one of the aims of this entire consultation was to save themselves work. A lot of that work was coming from the sheer numbers of NOVs, thousands of NOVs in issue, and per year, technically. So we don't pay Ofcom a penny. We're, you could say, a burden to the regulator, but they're doing us a good few favours. But to ensure that the new licence incorporates as much and has fewer exceptions around this area, we do expect a few tweaks in those definitions. There's other sort of, you could say, non-spectral issues, like there was a change or potential change to the concept of user services, because someone thought, oh, well, let's simplify the writing here. We expect that to sort of be changed again to sort of reassure that sector, but not in the way it was originally written, so because it's outdated. So a few things around the technical, and one or two areas we've got a few hints at, but anything to do with call sign policy, they won't say a thing. And that generally means we're assuming, as we have done, that most of this will come to pass. Other parts might get some useful tweaks. To be honest, other than some of the call sign policy, the vast majority of it is a very welcome change and modernisation. But issuing the statements is only the first part of quite an effort. What happens is, as almost probably accompanying that statement, will be what's known as a notice to vary. Now, this happened in 2006, and I think might have happened. It wasn't quite the same with the EMF regs, but so they issue their conclusions, and then the draft license that was in the original consultation document, if that's been tweaked, which it probably has been, that will be put out under a shorter notice period. So it's not reopening the entire consultation, it is merely the comments on the implementation, because the policy has been decided. It's just have they got the small print and definitions spot on. And that's where, if you've got some weird NOV that doesn't quite fit, or you spot a typo, etc., that's fine, but it's not a rewrite period, that. But nonetheless, there could still be the odd tweak. So formally, you won't be on new license terms till the end of Q1 next year, probably. This is approximate, but if you read the consultation, they're still aiming for this. I think that's a reasonable guess, okay? That's for individual amateurs. That doesn't automatically fix the thousands of NOVs for repeaters and stuff. And that's only the start of the story. So they're doing it on their current slightly flaky IT system. Did I say flaky? Wonderful IT system that, being a sort of third-party managed one, only has limited flexibility. So that, for other reasons, they're planning to replace it. So changes that can be done by minor twiddling around, such as, for example, altering the intermediate call signs for new intermediates from 2 series to M8, for example. Yeah, that's a minor edit in the data tweaking. Off they go. They'll have to, in conjunction with us, notify or change all the NOV holders. Some of them will be staying in OV mode. Some of them will be in a sort of somewhat different mode, because half their terms are now inside the main license, but their call signs are still, and the proof of coordination still comes from us. So it's an interesting thing there. And some of those finer terms around those are going to be amended, because they were a bit sort of naive in the first draft. Now, that licensing platform is what you log on to revalidate your license or apply for a special event station, etc. The first big tip is make sure you are got your details on there and revalidated, because when they come to not just attempting to notify you, but more importantly, transferring that database onto the new system, you don't want to be left behind. Otherwise, it'll be hard work, and the amount of staff at Warrington on the phone desk when the other 58,000 amateurs ring them up may be a bit limited. In fact, there's a major logistics issue associated with what is perceived to be a rush or waiting list of intermediates keen to change their call signs as well. So that's all done as part of the sort of phase 2, after March, but not too quickly. Some of those NOV things have to be done relatively quickly. Phase 3, this wording's taken from their original documentation, but it's worth plowing through, is where you really need the new IT to be around. So the ability to log on and change your call sign entirely, which was one of the options in there. Hopefully not every 2 years, but nonetheless. That's serious new programming. Some of the special event station stuff becomes a bit easier when you get to phase 3 as well, because that's a very new sort of call sign format. So this is their next financial year, which is April onwards, essentially. But this stuff happens relatively quickly. The other thing, which has been barely mentioned, is all the guidance, and there's 2 lots of guidance. There's the Ofcom guidance and there's RSGB guidance. It all has to be rewritten. No one's even thought about starting that part yet.
Mark, ask a quick
Yeah.
question. Is the financial, whatever is needed for phase 3, ring-fenced, considering we're going into an election next year and it's likely to be...
I can't answer the ring fence question, but they've already consulted and had approved on their annual plan that part, and it's not purely amateur. The amateurs are not the single biggest lump of licensing. Business radio, small boat, marine, some of the lighter aeronautical. That platform has to cope with hundreds of thousands of licensees of different categories. They know they've got some issues there, and I guess that, compared to some of their other stuff, they're just going to have to get on with it.
So my question is, they will have to do phase 3. They aren't going to be able to turn around and go, oh, you know what?
No, it's merely the timing, and of course we may not be high in the pecking order compared to people who are paying money for their licenses. But something has to happen. Right. It also has to happen with fewer and fewer people involved, because they go off and retire or the experience isn't there. So, yes. Right. So, without getting into ultra fine, is it this clause or that clause? That's what we can say there. There is one area, though, which I've mentioned, where it was in the consultation, but I thought I'd cover this because they're still thinking hard about what wider net they can draw to simplify and get rid of some of this stuff. So the consultation had various things associated with NOVs, notices of variation, for those of you who don't like acronyms. And a great goal was, in principle, to wipe out every NOV, but not the process associated with ETCC, okay? Because you get both new ones and renewals and site moves, so that generates a fair volume. Even though we do most of the work for them, nonetheless, before Ofcom to file and issue them, it's still work. Likewise, all the special event stations, although if you log in, the simple special event stations, you can log in and get one in about 5 minutes flat. In practice, an awful lot of amateurs contact them by email, and it's manual interaction. For special event stations, which are like the very long call sign ones, that's an entirely manual process. So this is an area they've been desperate to automate for quite a while, and the consultation referred to a single merged GB digits and letters format. We welcome that. It will be, provided your favourite GB is available, It'll be a very flexible system. It'll remove the requirement to be a public event, amongst other things. But that clearly is in that sort of, I doubt they'll be able to do it with the current software. They may be able to do some, because clearly some of it's online, but not necessarily all of it. So that generates a fair old volume. You only have to look in Radcom each week or GB2RS to see, good few SESs, and at least half of those will have been manually processed. So if they can get rid of hundreds of those transactions per week and hundreds of ETCC transactions per week, that will leave them happier. There's a whole pile of others as well. So although, how many keen cost testers are here? Anyone know what an SCC is? Short contest call signs. Yes, so they were in the Ofcom consultation. They said, oh, we'll leave those as is. Well, sorry, we weren't very happy with that, because we were hoping to get them changed in any case. So, and it's something that, because we in Porcelain Code, sort of process most of them, the amount of understanding in Ofcom, particularly now that our sort of previous experts moved on, is a bit of a gap there. There's other ones where effectively the RSGB provides the platform, like the newsreaders, NOV, the celebratory RSLs one, which they did consult on and should become a license condition. There's the spectral ones where some of these vary with the process and the term. So the 146 one is they have to be done annually on block. The other ones are rolling, but we run those as a service for Ofcom, essentially, without Spectrum licensing. So whilst the policy people remember this, the Spectrum licensing folk didn't have a clue. So having the entire picture looked at by the new staff, so they get the whole picture, is also part of this sort of thinking they're trying to do at the moment. And of course, some of these do change over time. We're still after a VLF facility, for example. And then there's some stuff that isn't amateur. Amateurs do things that aren't amateur. So whether it's RayNet use of business radio or innovation and trial licensing that you pay for, which is how a couple of 40 megs enthusiasts go about things, that's fine. And special research permits, there's only a few of these done per year, but they're the very high power ones, typically for EME, but the records of them, especially the early ones, are not very good, and they don't have nice expiry dates on them, which is a bit of an embarrassment. So they have to capture the entire picture. Anyway, so there's work to be done. We, obviously, if we're heading off to Serbia and sort of World Radio Conference, funnily enough, with a load of Ofcom staff, it'll be down to the people left behind to obviously work out what they're going to do. So I look forward and wish them the best. Right, now, you've seen Ofcom's next steps. RSGB's got to do a few as well. So, coming soon, literally in days perhaps, we've had to start work early on the mods to the exam syllabus, for example. So clearly all the license conditions change. By default, any new syllabus has to be ready before you can write books, training material, put 6 months notice out for it to come into effect, all the palaver. If you work that timeline back, as Alan knows, it started about a month or so back, didn't it? Needless to say, as per Tony Kent's video, we had 3 videos, by the way, during this. The third one did have Tony Kent, who manages exams, and we made plain at that point, but I'm just emphasising it here, that we're only going to change the licence conditions. That may also include some operating aspects which are affected by those licence conditions, but all the rest of it's staying as is, whether you like it or not. That will still leave a lot of thinking around future directions for the syllabus downstream, but there's only so many people left with hours in the day to do these things. The other thing we have already indicated in that community is some of the call sign stuff, especially if it's RSLs or intermediate calls, etc., or even the SCC tweaks, may not come until, say, March, April, or whenever. By then, the 2024 contest season will have already started. So the current rule set will have to apply, even though the licensing conditions for operating under those rules will sort of change well, it's not midway, but perhaps a third of the way. If RSLs potentially go optional, the contest rules will say thou shalt use your RSL. So it keeps it an as-is situation during 2024, but by the end of the year, end of next year, then they'll obviously see if it needs adjusting. In practice, when we had the contest committee looked at this, there was very, very little in HF contest that actually was RSL dependent. Slightly different in VHF, but not as much as people were worried about. Clearly, the NOV changes affect ETCC quite markedly in places. They've already done one service mod quietly already, and will potentially offer a new self-coordination service. So if you're up to 5 watts ERP, the new arrangements basically leave you pretty free, and of course gateways, low power whisper beacons and a few other things fall into that category. But of course people still like downloading listings, checking if there's an appropriate frequency, band plan guidance, etc. So how we offer that service, but more as a sort of voluntary or self-registration service, is being looked at. Once you're above 5 watts, it's a fairly traditional arrangement, I have to say, other than the sort of close down and you're getting a call sign as a badge of authorization and coordination rather than a variation to your license. But if you are challenged on, oh, it's causing interference because you're in the wrong part of the band plan because you've been a bit stupid, and you don't have the evidence of going through the process, then you get caught. So even though it's not an NOV, there's subtle wording, and in fact some quite strong wording, depending on which elements you're looking at in the new conditions, that manage the quite large change they've done there. It's all about interactive information though as well, and we know the IT platform that ETCC sits on is a bit bespoke and isn't very mobile friendly, so there's a lot of volunteer work and maybe some investments in that area as well. They've recruited a new data chap actually who's got some good background, so interesting to see how that comes along. But and then, Spectrum Forum, overall coordination point for spectrum licensing band plans. Clearly, as I mentioned earlier, we will not have a chance. We'll want the Christmas break, quite frankly. So we'll return in January. There will be, in the VHF area, a partial redesign. So some of the newer 5 watt stuff is going to be on segregated channeling. We are not going to have a mixture of ad hoc pop-up repeaters on the top of the main repeaters, for example. That's just a recipe for chaos. We need to give good guidance as part of this coordination. Quite frankly, our simplex frequencies aren't used as much as they ought to be. Some of them will be redesignated, I suspect. But what we need to do is also see what this process is going to do to us. Right, I think that may be it on Ofcom. Right, any other questions on Ofcom?
Excuse my ignorance, is there going to be, or hasn't been, I don't think hasn't, a kind of feedback to members saying those that contributed made comments has been listened to, worthwhile? Because one of the things that struck me yesterday, which I wasn't quite shocked about, is that it's about the power of this organisation. But we only get 1 in 3 new licensees join RSGB.
Correct.
Which I think is something that any marketing organisation would address that urgently, and that surely has an impact on what Ofcom does with RSGB.
To some degree, you're right and wrong. I don't expect that ratio to change, by the way.
You don't?
No, the Spectrum Forum is actually the responsible organisation for the demographics and strategic direction of the hobby in terms of the numbers. The exam stats are along with the membership stats, have been showing either that ratio or the upgrade ratio as being relatively static for a decade or more, quite frankly. So the only way to address the sheer numbers and growth issue is how do you reach out wider at the baseline? What we've done, particularly at foundation level, is we have wiped out every possible hurdle that we can think of in the foundation license, okay? Supervision, airborne, home construction, you name it, it's been wiped out. We've added Wi-Fi to maker spaces. That groundwork was part of that thinking. It is for development and other outreach to exploit and build on those huge opportunities, but that part won't change. We will not have seen, unless someone's copied it to us, we have not seen what other people have put in.
How many copies did you receive? Do you know how many?
We only got a handful of direct bits of feedback to ourselves, okay? There's two things. One is we deliberately drove people to respond individually. B, we didn't have that much bandwidth for coping with too many inquiries, but interestingly, and I know Steve Thomas isn't here, the mailbox wasn't quite as busy as you think, actually. Mine was quieter than we thought. Yeah. But we were holding, in addition to the public video stuff, we were running team sessions with quite a number of the sectors as well. So if people had copied us their response, fine, but most people didn't. So we're just as interested in what's happening here. All we can say is thank you to those who did get their pen out or do a bit of typing. We will see. Right. Anyway, moving on. In order for us to make progress, there's a few other things which are highly relevant, particularly this one in some respects. COVID had disrupted the classical 3-year cycle for IARU Region 1 conferences. However, we returned to the first physical event in years. Unfortunately, it's in a slightly tricky to get to place, but we've sorted out our logistics in Zlatibor in Serbia. Not on RSGB's wanted list, I have to say. As I'll show in a minute, the scope of this meeting is considerable. A lot of papers, in fact, we were called for inputs. The papers are online. As you'll discover in a moment, we got very little feedback from members, but I don't blame you. Sometimes the material's a bit dry, but nonetheless, it can be influential. The budgets are always an interesting one because a proportion of everyone's membership fee goes to it. It supports both amateur growth and spectrum defence. So Barry Lewis's time in IARU, for example, or CPT, is funded out of that sort of percentage rake-off from all the member societies. The General Committee looks at general policy, funnily enough, takes ownership of some of the spectrum stuff. There's, some of you may have heard of this sort of shaping the future effort on future development projects. There's also things like some of the radio sports and contest stuff tend to fall into this area, and quite frankly, as RSGB, we're already on record and in print at having some serious concerns in parts of this area, whereas some of the other stuff's very welcome, of course. So it's always a bit swinging and roundabouts. At C4, which is HF, for the past 2.5 years, there's been a plan for a new HF Global Band Plan, which is a minor tweaking at the edges, although others would say otherwise, because, of course, FT8, and it's not just FT8, has emerged. And that's seeking more, not so much vast amounts of more room, but harmonised spots. So no matter where you are in the world, everyone ends up on the same sort of harmonised frequencies. And that's quite difficult to manage classically. Any given region only meets once every 3 years. They meet on different years. So if you want a proposal that harmonises all of them, it's a long cycle, or you come up with a slightly different approach. We'll mention this in a bit more. All the slide sets for these are online, in case you're wondering. C5 at above 30 megs, VHF, UHF, SHF. Clearly, although this is before the World Radio Conference, the 23 SEMS topic will guarantee to feature in that. We proposed some other changes ourselves in 70 SEMS and 23 SEMS already. I think most of the other modernisation's been done. Traditionally, RSGB's put a lot of work into C5 to support mainly emerging digital stuff. And if anyone was in sort of my friend Mr. Lauder's talk earlier, or his next one in about a quarter of an hour's time, then yes, that's hard work. You don't see many papers, but things like the noise measurement project.
You said you didn't get many member responses. What is the process by which these are communicated to members?
Well, it helps if you either... The process is, it's been in... I'll show you in a moment. It's been in Radcom this year once, GB2RS twice, social media twice, and we've done all that in 2 previous years as well. Yeah, it's exactly the same proposal, but now it's come to voting time. So in some respects, people get bored of it, and the initial shock or novelty's worn off, you might say. Having said that, the question is, are the assumptions made in 2021 still valid for 2023 onwards? And that's where I have a slight concern. But if you go off, and whether it's on RSGB's IARU consultation page or on the downloads, all the links are at the end, by the way, then you'll get a load of slides, but we've summarised them in a slightly sort of, I won't say controversial, but in-your-face manner here, that to rebalance the arrangements, it's only small bits of kilohertz in general from either side, mostly from SSB, but occasionally it is the CW bit as well occasionally. Those changes and the principles behind them, so the slide set gives you a planning principle. It's absolutely Joe Taylor modes only. Now, if that was the only thing that was going to happen to amateur radio and they weren't going to produce any new modes, that might work. As far as we're concerned, we don't think that's a very good basis for planning. We've already got digital voice from the commercial radios, from D-Star Fusion, what have you, in parts of the HF bands. They tune all the way down. We have deliberately introduced digital ATV into 10 meters as part of some very impressive experimentation there, with a goal of crossing the Atlantic in high-definition video on HF. We've almost done that with the conditions, but as the technology improves, that might be revolutionary almost. And, of course, 10 meters has got the bandwidth to play, as opposed to the lower bands. So we don't think this is ultra-future-proof. We want to keep it open, perhaps, to other stuff that might come along without totally squeezing, traditional use. So on the most recent one, where we had put out those reminders I mentioned, officially we did not get one single reply. Now, that may come to a shock to you, but that's what happened. So we are, apart from some refinements, largely expecting this to be nodded through. If it is, then these HF band plan tweaks will be included in the New Year's process, along with the VHF implications of the Ofcom stuff, for example. Right, not much left. I'm going to keep this one short but prettier. So, World Radio Conference coming up, apart from 23 centimetres. There's some serious other big items that will get headlines elsewhere. So there's the potential, well, quite frankly, the potential end of UHF TV as we know it, as more and more of it moves gradually towards mobile broadband spectrum. There's certainly an awful lot of satellite issues, and the 5G people are already thinking about the next G, quite frankly. So there's always that stuff going on. We've already lost most of our relevant bits of spectrum to the mobile folk. So actually, our greatest issues are science, climate, and of course our navigation challenge is actually more of a problem for us than the mobile broadband items this time around. So whilst the top priority is yeah, obviously Barry's going to continue to spend lots of valuable time on this band. The summary is there will be no new amateur proposals for spectrum. There haven't been for a while, apart from rationalising 6 metres, and there won't be for a generation, because it is too expensive and too difficult just to hold on to every current piece of hertz we've got at the moment. There are a couple of other concerns though. So below this headline is any 6 metre group members here? One. They know about this. This gem. So, climate change. One of the requirements is to see where all the water is, or how thick the ice is. They're going to fly. Actually, this antenna is small. The full thing's 9 elements long, and there's a cluster of them, running broadband radar pulsing waveforms across 40 to 50 megs, and the outer band emissions stretch out a bit more, which is ever so helpful, especially if you're wanting to use 50 megahertz DX. Fortunately, after a lot of toing and froing, whilst the spectral width of these hasn't shrunk that much, it's mainly going to be done at about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, where hopefully you're not doing too much amateur radio. But of course, if there's some sporadic E on, which happens to funnel the propagation over to the other side of the world, it may not be 3 or 4 in the morning over there. So yes, but you know, the people dream these things up. The antenna is bigger than the satellite. How anyone, on a practical engineering point of view, can work that one out, I do not know. But they're going to fly them. And the other one, which is was a late start, but is a potentially nuisance one, is one that classically we've got quite an interest in, which is what makes propagation change: space weather. And because it's on government risk registers now, because if you get a nasty solar surge, it knocks out all your satellite navigation, amongst other things, the scientists have jumped on another political priority to get themselves some, essentially, almost a new ITU service and primary allocations potentially for all their sensors. The first part of it is defining what is a space weather service. Don't have a great issue with that. That's what, funny enough, 91A as opposed to 91B will do. Not a great issue. Where the problem is all the frequencies in use. So there's stuff across HF and low VHF, and unfortunately for us, our French colleagues have been as helpful as ever, and instead of using 52 to 54, they deliberately have dropped it into our part of 6 meters. So our concern here is if you've got a big receiving ground station area, they may say, well, to protect it, we need a 50-kilometre exclusion zone of any of the 6 metre users, for example. So yes, that does concern us a little bit, but there aren't too many of those unless you're in Ireland or Netherlands. Oh yeah, the proposals for the frequencies vary significantly between the regions. Trying to get the list down to size is being the challenge. So we don't quite know yet. Anyway, so the short summary is between Ofcom, IARU, ITU, we haven't had many dull moments this year, and there won't be many over the next few weeks, but we hope you found this insight useful.
Thank you, Murray.
Are there any questions? Yes, Don.
Just ask a controversial one.
Oh,
Murray.
I like good ones.
I'm not known for being controversial. The impression I get is looking in from the outside into the UK is that the Ofcom consultation, to a significant extent, there are elements in there that came a bit as a bit of a surprise. How would you characterise the strategic relationship between the Society and Ofcom on the adversarial to collaborative spectrum?
So I don't mind saying that we've been more collaborative than adversarial, because for them to put out a consultation with a surprising amount of background knowledge on it, no, that didn't come from nowhere. They were interested in our views of what amisters do and what we thought of those current very ageing licence conditions. Now, we haven't, some of that was unofficial liaison. You won't see mega meetings with minutes or anything. But it was all very good-natured, I think it's fair to say. Clearly when it got to RSLs, a number of board members are very proud of their RSLs, but we realised that if you're going to have a disagreement over that sort of stuff, where we know it's important for some folk, you couldn't do it on regulatory or technical grounds. They've got no purpose at all. So in that section, you'll have noticed we had to use very clever language around identity, knowing that Ofcom have a duty to the individual nations.
Yep, okay.
But no, it's been very good-natured.
Good, okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? Good.
Thank you. Murray, a question about the IARU band plan, the proposed changes to put a bit more space in for data. At the Spectrum Forum meeting last year, myself and one other person who was representing VMARS pointed out or expressed an opinion that the bottom end of 80 metres was much less heavily occupied than the top bit, above 3.6. And we both felt that if there was to be an expansion of data modes into an adjacent bit of the band, logically it ought to move down into the CW segment rather than up into SSB. But we were the only two people to express any opinion on that, and I'm just wondering if that's been completely forgotten or whether it's being taken on board.
So we haven't really been involved in the people who dreamt this up. In Greenshields had some connection with it, but it was a very tight-knit committee, and it was very Joe Taylor orientated, as I said. So, for example, PSK 31 users or other ad hoc data mode users, some of the QRP and other stuff, not really considered. When you look at the proposals, you do see various levels of detail, and they start to analyse where some of these things fall. But I have to say, and ironically, we were due to have one of the senior leads on that planning, who's Australian, with us, and he sadly couldn't make it to the convention this weekend, because we do believe, although it's a bit late in the day, in terms of practical usage and where it might grow, some of it might want another final look. But there's no doubt that digital has grown and seeks some certainty in the band plan, I think it's fair to say.
Okay, any last question? Right, I think we're sort of out of time anyway. So thank you very much, Murray. Can we thank Murray again in the usual way?
It's all there.